Bună ziua, doamnelor și domnilor, stimați colegi. Suntem la prezentarea studiului despre cleptocrație din Republica Moldova.
Dear colleagues, we shall present this study on the kleptocracy in Moldova, from kleptocracy to authentic Moldova, which has been implemented by Mr. Victor Cioban within the framework of IPRE and Watchdog. The Republic of Moldova, well, it took the Republic of Moldova only 17 years to go through all forms of kleptocracy, from most modest ones to till the most perverted and dangerous forms of a mafiotic state. This survey proves through evidence how this has happened through specific actions and how we have managed to move from more simplistic forms of kleptocracy to complicated and complex degradation of state. However, the biggest challenge that we all face today is to find solutions and ways out of this state of the art, of this kleptocracy. And apparently the ingredients for doing that are there. The citizens of Moldova have clearly mentioned that they do not want to be further in a mafiotic state, and they voted against the mafiotic regime which existed in Moldova. There is a power which has a majority, which is more than a comfortable majority, whose clear fight, as announced, is fighting the corruption in Moldova. However, something's still missing so that the reforms, the changes, and the purge from oligarchy happens quickly. As I understood from this survey, one of the most important elements to move fast so that the system does not manage to absorb the politics, reorganize and change, turn into a different form and not be able to be defied. So I really wish that in today's discussion we address the topic of solutions which we have to get rid of kleptocracy, to manage to free our state from oligarchic elements, those elements which have contributed to making the state a captured state. I would like to offer the floor first to our special guests of the event, Minister of Justice, Mr. Litvinenko. You have the floor for introductory remarks, please. Good morning. Thank you very much for having invited me to participate at this event. I do agree with what you have mentioned in the beginning. There had been elections organized. At elections, people have given a clear verdict for fighting corruption, for removing oligarchy, kleptocracy, and so on. Unfortunately, in this period of time, the Republic of Moldova has been through all these forms: the theft of the billion, the laundromat, the capturing of the justice system. These are the things which have brought us, which have made us famous in the whole world. And this is why it has become important that with the vote of the people, we need to make a systemic reform in the area of justice. And we have started this reform because this pre-vetting, or the purpose of the pre-vetting is to ensure Supreme Council of Magistrates and Supreme Council of Prosecutors. We need honest people that would clean the prosecution service and the system, judiciary, to clean these systems from people which have nothing to do there. And then there are other steps to follow. I have seen this survey, and I would like to emphasize the main element: a systemic reform. At the same time, a systemic reform cannot be done over the night. I mean, you cannot do, on the one hand, the systemic reform, and on the other hand, have immediate results. And this is why, besides the systemic reform which would last and its calendar for implementation, has been planned to be similar to the period of this parliament's mandate. And we also aim at other things as well. At least we have started to stop these thefts which happen in the public system. And currently, together with other things which have been done, the state's institutions have all the possibilities to fight corruption on the midterm, but also obviously in order not to get into a situation that after 4 or 8 years, and we do not want to see kleptocracy or oligarchy coming back, we need to do the systemic reform. Thank you. I'd like to offer the floor to Lilian Karp, MP and chairperson of the Committee on Security, Public Order and Defense. If I always need to test my memory on this, so thank you for your invitation. Well, indeed, to understand how corruption evolved in Moldova since its independence, we need to understand the anatomy of the corrupt system of Moldova. And if we believe that corruption has come up only since 2001 onwards, well, actually things are more complex. Corruption acts and thefts have started happening when privatization happened. And many of these assets today are huge piles of used metal, because the companies which were privatized then could not work. I mean, they were not put to work. And some of them have been dismantled and sold for old metal. But if we look at the history of Moldova in 30 years, we will see that corruption begins with how political parties are funded in Moldova. Because if political parties, and in its 30 years history, Moldova has always had a funder. And this funder invested in financing parties. And then after elections, they wanted to get returns on that investment and get their share of this. And around this so-called king of the party, there was always this the team or the suite, and they were like a feudal, and they acted like this, and they developed the corruption schemes within the system. This is how in Moldova the political party and the elites actually had it, so that we could have the politically appointed person had to collect the contributions locally through different schemes. So what we understood that actually we need to undertake a number of actions to ensure the correct financing of the political parties. First of all, we need to have a political elite which would understand that we need to have cheap politics. I mean, those that want to make politics don't have to invest. And when we voted for funding of political parties from the state budget, we wanted to give a chance to honest people to make politics, and at the same time to remove certain oligarchs from this desire to control political parties. Today, we still have in the parliament political parties which have heavily funded and they invest to different schemes, social shops and so on, which still control the minds of the people. And the biggest schemes of corruption are around these oligarchs, starting with the laundromat, the billion theft, the bus stations and so on. If we look at the list, you would see that there are tens of billions of leis that were stolen. And that was thanks to this, let's say, shadow financing of political parties. And in the elections too, we have seen that there had been, well, certain political competitors were removed because of this illegal funding. And we want more transparency as regards the operation, financing of political parties. The Ministry of Justice has proposed amendments, and we still need to further work on that, because along with the transparency of the financing of political parties, we will have an elite that will not get engaged in corruption. Well, the most important thing is to turn off the taps of the money which flows to the political parties, because then it would be easier to follow how they would be funded. Since this is a mixed event, we have both live participants and online participants. We have Pedro Kulak, Executive Director of the Soros Foundation in Moldova. Mr. Kulak, dear colleagues, hello, I hope you can hear me. Well, reiterating what Mr. Karp has mentioned earlier, and actually paraphrasing a little bit what he was saying, I think that the history of Moldova since the 1990s has been a continuous fight between the 10 democratization trends and the corruption schemes, because the schemes have started then. Well, first of all, I would like to thank Mr. Ciobanu for this retrospective of the developments of the political system and corruption in the Republic of Moldova. And also, I'd like to thank the organizers for organizing such discussions. And it is really good that in the society we address such issues. It is good that they would have the ultimate goal of developing practical conclusions which would guide the following steps of the decision makers. At the same time, I can't miss saying that lately I have seen a change in the terminology. Until very recently, people spoke of captured state. Now we have different alternatives, kleptocracy and so on. I am actually not very happy with this change in democracy, in the terminology, especially after the elections in 2020, 2021. Well, I would not like to speak of kleptocracy. I would like to use rather the terms of corruption and captured state to look at these issues. However, we need to understand and admit that there had been important steps made to model a captured state. And on the other hand, even if there are huge efforts undertaken, there are still very many issues as regards the control of corruption. We must admit that currently corruption is still flourishing, and this is done. This is shown also by the Corruption Perception Index, which placed Moldova on the 115th out of 150 surveyed states, and this is. I hope really very much that this meeting will allow us to speak of these things as they are. And I would like to highlight two very important elements, actually, which characterize this corruption phenomenon in Moldova. First thing, any level state institutions are closely intertwined with different groups, smaller, larger networks, which perform money-making activities for the protagonists, but which causes lots of losses for the citizens and for the state. But this actually would apply to all the schemes that were described by Victor. So from small family businesses where the wife is a civil servant and the husband has a business, and until the other very high level, like laundering millions and billions of obscure source money and delays in trials and so on. Well, a biggest part of these money-making activities are done within apparent legality realm. Let's remember the laundromat, which would have not been possible without the amendments of the legal framework that has been done under the umbrella of the best experts in these matters in the country. So My call, my urge to the authorities would be, in order to enhance the resilience of the state to corruption, we need to pay attention to two elements, very important. The elimination of the corrupt clans with the state institutions, and second, removing all the opportunities of legitimizing the corruptive activities of these clans. I do hope that today's discussions will include the entire range of the topics which refer to the anti-corruption area. But beyond that, I truly hope that we would discuss specific solutions to these issues. Best of luck to everyone. I'm sorry, but I cannot hear the sound for some reason. It's there. Yes, perfect. So I apologize for these technical hiccups. There are always such technical issues when we have hybrid formats, but it's important that we have heard Pedro's message and the urge for these debates, and this is really important. Well, together with the colleagues from the Watchdog, last year decided to make an effort to understand better the kleptocratic system of the Republic of Moldova, the phenomenon which has netted our institutions, made them fragile. And we were very happy that the Soros Foundation of Moldova had been interested in this effort. And throughout one whole year, last year, we have made a lot of efforts to explain, to detail certain processes. We have contributed with public policies, opinions for authorities on what could be improved, law-wise, and so on. And today, we are in this situation when we can draw totals of this situation. And on the occasion of today's event, we shall also hear the opinions of the authorities, colleagues from the civil society, those which follow this topic, and certainly as a result of today's debates, some elements would be reflected in the survey, and if the survey would have to be added or completed. And I would only like to thank all those who understand how important it is to consolidate a democratic system to advance on the path of European integration, to bring order in our house, because otherwise we would not be able to advance, to align not only to values, but also de facto with our European family. And This topic is very actual today when Moldova has submitted its application for accession, and we will continue working on the aspects of human rights and law enforcement and rule of law, and all these policies would be reflected in this assessment exercise, and it would definitely depend to what extent the dynamic, our progress would be influenced and our European aspirations would be influenced. So here I'd like to stop and pass on the floor for moderating this session. Not before inviting Mr. Ciobanu next to us, that together with Valeriu will present the main findings and recommendations of this survey. And then we also have Ilie Kirtoacă and head of the National Anti-Corruption Center, Ms. Julian Rus, who will join this discussion and will have this discussion. Mariana, then I'm sure we're in good hands as regards the questions and answers. So thank you very much. I'm looking forward to hearing the conclusions of the survey. Thank you.
Okay, in terms of the time, it would be very good if we had more time for discussions. So my call to you is that, look, the effort was big to write this study. 15 minutes. Okay. All right. Before presenting the study itself, can I comment what was stated by Mr. Kulak? This kleptocracy term or concept is not very fortunate. It's rather unfortunate because we have concepts of captured state, etc. You know, it's true that this is a narrower concept and than plutocracy, which is narrower than oligarchy. And if oligarchy was researched in Moldova and that studies have been done, then kleptocracy was not the case. Now, this is an advantage when you take a concept which is relatively narrow but well structured, that it can become operational and useful in an activity, including political and governmental, etc. Because, you know, we have some objectives and we state them very often, that we want to destructure endemic corruption. Well, look, before destructuring something, it's important to structure something to understand very well what we want to disassemble. So the study is useful in the way it is presented now. But when it comes to other concepts, you know, I will refer to another concept in the study. It's a new concept in the study, but which will be researched. And unfortunately, we haven't yet researched it, analyzed it thoroughly. All right. I will not provide you scientific definitions because we all know them. Kleptocracy is a generalized theft of public money and people's money by those in power, using all the state tools to this end. Kleptocracy is a form of plutocracy, which is a form of oligarchy. What is the feature of kleptocracy is generalized corruption and institutionalized corruption, which develops in parallel. And the study shows that they are overlapping. You have oligarchy, kleptocracy, corruption in a number of layers. so you have these periods which somehow are crossing each other. But it's important to understand that because the phenomenon is multi-dimensional. Now, the study also talks about the development of oligarchy in Moldova from delegative democracy, from independence up until 2020 towards semi-consolidated democracy, and then competitive oligarchy. And here, when you had a captured state already from 29 to 2015, we have a monopolist oligarchy and a mafia state. So this concept, I'll refer to it a bit later. In 2015, 2019, after the events from 2019, we have the destructuring of the mafia state, but it is partial only because the formal structure of mafia that led this state up until 2019 disappeared. But what did not disappear is the economic foundation as well as the schemes. So basically, the the spine of the system exists, and these schemes are there intact, even though we have some communication from the government that they have been taken out. They say that the Metalfero scheme is out. It actually functions under a different name. Well, in a way or another. All right. After 2021, we have a democratic government, and this stage we called it transition towards a genuine democracy. But to be more precise, I would keep the word attempt to get back to a democratic state system, because from the other studies, we have some findings that democracies, they do not necessarily, so look, the transit does not necessarily lead to a democracy. And we in Moldova had 2 attempts to go back to the to a different type of democracy during Voronin time, and specifically during Plahotniuc time, when we ended up in a situation of a mafia state. The peculiarity of a mafia state, and by the way, this is a new concept introduced into this study, which was structured and by Valent Magyar in his study from 2016, Anatomy of a Mafia State, post-socialist mafia state. The peculiarity of this state is that the state becomes a predator. So the raiderism becomes centralized in this state. And at the foundation of this mafia state and the kleptocratic state by default, you have the control of political systems, control of economic systems, control of justice, and control of mass media. So these are the 4 pillars that you create this mafia state on. Now, the control of political system in a mafia state was shown by the destruction of political parties. During Plahotniuc regime, they were practically destroyed. I mean, from right to left, you know this phenomenon, from communists to liberals, to liberal Democrats, etc. Basically, they created a dominant party, which in Magyar terminology, they call it a party in the mafia state. They call it adoptive political family. And the leaders of these parties are pater familias. In the press, we call him capi di tutti capi. So that was when you talk about Moldova. Now, when it comes to the economic area, economic sector, let me describe this briefly, but you all know, and here I would express my gratitude to the investigation press, investigation journalists, which actually did much more than all the investigative bodies together in describing all of this theft schemes. So the theft is either from public money or from citizens directly. If you talk about energy schemes, right? They steal from us, from each and everyone, from every cubical meter of gas, kilowatt hour. You know, we are paying the invoices, and then the money through offshore companies go to well-known destinations, which function, and they should be destroyed. Now, my predecessors talked about it. Of course, the theft of the billion made us famous across the world. So here, you know, our uniqueness is not that banks collapsed. Banks collapsed in other more powerful countries. They were nationalized. Well, we didn't nationalize them, but well, you know, the billion was stolen from FX reserves. Well, and this makes us champions. We should also talk about the laundromat scheme, which somehow was put on a dead footing due to a dubious attitude of the management of prosecution, previous management of prosecution, which was inspired by the operator of this scheme, which basically consulted prosecution general. Look, I'm very aware that prosecution does not have professionals in this field, and I would welcome such consultations, but not when you put the person free and the person is good in London, but visiting him in the penitentiary. And then the collaboration with the investigation would lead to a decrease of the punishment, as it is the case in other civilized countries. Because when I was told that there is no predicate offense in Russian Federation, that is why the laundromat would not exist. That is crazy. Look, I'm not a lawyer, and I would not get into legal discussions because I don't want to give too many arguments. Look, in Russian Federation, you have convictions on laundromat. You have banks without a license. You have presidents of banks which are behind bars, and that is there, you know? And we keep talking about whether there is or there is no. Okay, control of justice. During Plahotniuc regime, this was emblematic. You know, couriers that would run from the headquarters of the party to the courts with the written text of the sentence. Prosecutors who open cases. You know, here, this was a bit of a deal. Prosecutors and judges, they had free hand to do whatever they wanted. When they execute the order by phone or via a courier that comes from party headquarters. All right, and then the last one, control of mass media. Here, very well-known things and reported by the press, investigative press. We had Plahotniuc Holding that was a monopolist on the market, and then after the disappearance of sudden disappearance of Plahotniuc, this one migrated to the Don. The Don becomes the biggest magnet of mass media in Moldova. And it is weird they say that he spends 5 million to buy, or 8 million, right? Dollars to buy TVs, to buy newspapers, TV stations, sorry, and buy newspapers. Look, this somehow is just a funny thing, but I don't see any results when, in terms of investigating this, these obvious things. You know, any financing of this kind. All right, Bahamas is emblematic. And there you have all the evidence. All the evidence is laid bare on the table. I don't know what else needs to happen for this to be punished. And as Mr. Karp said, you know, it's from here that we start with political party financing. This is very important, but not sufficient, because as I said, kleptocrats are there. We have gone through 2019 when we said that formally mafia state disappeared, but the system of mafia state is still here. We are back to the captured state system, where all the operators who were devoted and loyal to the mafia regime to a large extent are either in positions or they are still operating their schemes. Let me tell you about Andronaki, who works, and he is well known where he is. He's well known where he is, and the schemes are also operating. Kleptocratic system, unfortunately, is adapting, is regrouping to the new realities, to new conditions. Look, this very well known. There is public servants who were loyal to all regimes. You know, those who were loyal to the mafia regime, they should leave the system. And here we want actions from the government. You know, determined action from the government. Because indeed, you said in opening remarks about the determination of the government as well as the speed of actions. Because the statement about the captured nature of the state, which was an extraordinary document, political and legal document, was not, I mean, you know, embraced by the government in terms of the tool it provides, but they haven't really harnessed its potential, because theoretically this was an old concept already, because at that time it was a mafia state already, but because there was in the public sphere you didn't have this concept, you know, that declaration was very, very good, which would offer a lot of opportunities which unfortunately were not harnessed, were not used. I'll ask my colleague to also take the floor. Hi. I'll try and talk about recommendations and some concluding statements. Let me talk about the kleptocracy term. It defines very efficiently what was a feature of the political system of the governments in Moldova in the last at least 15 years. It is hard to put specific days when a stage ended and a new stage started of this kleptocratic system. You know, conventionally, you can do it, but actually, I think that 16 January 2016, it is quite an important date. This was the date when they voted for Philip government. You know, that was the installation of a monolithical regime, oligarchical, monopolistic, or captured mafia state, run by Plahotniuc. Now, why kleptocracy is useful as a term? It is simple. If you translate it into a usual language, it means control, taking over, and control of power to steal. That's very simple, plain language. That is clear to the to persons, to steal from the budget, to steal from us by running schemes across services, by selling assets, monopolistic schemes, tax evasion, but not only. What Plahotniuc did, he actually developed it even further than these classical elements of corruption. Basically, his view was to turn Moldova into a Tortuga of 21st century, to make deals, and actually to control sovereignty of the state, to make business with the stamp of the government by imposing institutions of the state to either take actions which, like those who ought to do nothing. And here we talk about smuggling. You talk about programs to offer the so-called citizenship against investments, which should transform Moldova in a refugee for international criminals. That actually was started. Hiding in Chișinău people like Riza, or that corrupt judge from Ukraine, Charles, who was brought and kept here. Look, these were pilot projects of what Plahotniuc was wanting to do to keep the power, to actually really implement this kind of businesses and run them. Laundromat started during the oligarchy pluralism, but it is from the same category by controlling justice and the legislative power. They changed the laws and they allowed to launder tens, but actually $100 billion 2015, 2011 through Moldova. They've used the stamp of the state to create a business which is a criminal business at the international level. Now, getting back to the recommendations now. Look, as we can see, way out of the situation or strengthening the transition towards rule of law and democracy, as weird as it is, there should be a foreign policy effort of international cooperation, and namely an advocacy made or done by both state institutions and the political leadership and civil society to apply international sanctions against key individuals from the time of capture state. Why do we need this? Because that would freeze their assets. That would make it possible to recover those in the future legally, and then it will send a clear, strong message to the system. First of all, to the justice system, but also to the political class from Moldova, that this ideal business that they have applied, Plahotniuc, Shore, Kafkaluk, Platon, Landronake, I think there's many more than these ones, they just take their luggage and they leave. They just leave without big headache. They use stolen money abroad and they wait. They continue to mix, to interfere in political affairs of Moldova. They continue controlling here schemes, businesses, mass media, finance political parties in order to come back to power and to reinstate their business, because that is it. I mean, we shouldn't hide behind a finger. Look, this is the strategy that they want to erode this government, to help it make mistakes, to protect its own people in key positions for various useful positions, including by sending them to work allegedly for the new government. And the new elections, they should come back on a white horse and start from where they stopped. Now, application of transitory justice elements, which indeed through this vetting and pre-vetting concept are there, in one way or another. We understand that the vision of the government is to have gradual change. Maybe it is motivated. You need probably, but you actually know much more than we do. It is my personal view, actually, that we need much more radical steps. But here we can discuss that, debate that, if that is the correct way or not. And it's not the purpose of today's meeting. But actually, what is scientifically called transitory justice is a lustration, yeah, in the judicial system and state systems. Now, the government chose the minimum, the least invasive, but the ones with bigger risk of failing, or that this result would be late. Now, another element would be concentration of focusing, say, NAC and educational persecution on big corruption, large corruption, political corruption, to free up resources in this area, and strengthening international cooperation, where the government actually needs to, I here mean doing the investigation for prosecutors and investigating bodies, where the government should also do its job, which is to facilitate and to ask other countries to offer more resources in order to operationalize the joint groups, and not to offer the prosecutors from Moldova enough reason to excuse themselves from doing nothing. Let me add some recommendations from the study. Given that the justice reform and fighting corruption and these historical big cases is one which is long-term, it is very important to ensure stability, political stability, and stability of the political system in a pluralistic environment, of course. Simply put, I am not the advocate that the governing party should have majority. No, that is a democratic process. This is citizens to decide. But what the government can do, a state can do, is to stimulate a competition among healthy political forces. Simply put, today we have two alternatives. It is this government which committed to do reforms and to punish perpetrators, criminals, and corruption and crimes against the state. If they're able or not, we will see. That doesn't really matter now. But the second political alternative, which is very diverse, but actually it represents a very large coalition of kleptocratic forces, which have all kinds of oligarchs behind them, and people who usually should be behind bars. Well, that is a dangerous outlook. Because failures and successes and the success, either big or small, is that if the kleptocrats come back, they will be coming back very quickly. Very quickly. And we saw this during 2019 when the PSRM-PD coalition came back in 1 year. Platon was out. Not only was he out of the prison, but actually he started doing business again. And that is just one thing.
Și încă o recomandare la mine, care la prima
Another
vedere...
more recommendation, maybe it's from the first side, you can't say it's so connected, but it is crucially important. This is systemic work for reducing the influence of Kremlin on political processes in the Republic of Moldova. The media influence, the propaganda, the illegal financing of political parties, media, and groups of influence has a huge impact on the results of elections. We have big groups of the voters who are captured, and maybe it's not the appropriate context to discuss it today on kleptocracy and so on, because these pro-Russian forces we wouldn't discuss this if these pro-Russian forces wouldn't be pro-corrupt as well. So if our voters would not vote for those who just show them the picture of Putin And as long as this exists, we would have these pro-corrupt forces in the parliament that turn into coalitions, announced or unannounced, but still. And the fight to defend national security would have a positive effect on the sustainability of a democratic political system and anti-corruption at the same time. That's all on my side. Thank you. Thank you very much, Valerio, for your intervention. And also thank you for the recommendations. Now I'd like to invite you to the following stage. And I would like to invite you to discuss with a number of guests where we'll discuss about this survey, as well as on how to enhance the resilience of our society towards the kleptocracy in Moldova. I'd like to offer the floor to Mr. Litvinenko, because I understand he needs to leave very soon. So, Mr. Litvinenko, could you please refer to the element that Mr. Kulak mentioned when he took the floor? And that was about that we need to be careful and pay attention to two important elements: how we eliminate the interconnections between certain groups of influence on justice or on the factors of power which can contribute to the perpetuation of schemes, creation of schemes, to corruption and illegal acts. And the second thing would be how we could eliminate the legitimacy or making crimes legitimate by creating a legal framework that allows for that. I mean, it allows to legalize certain crimes, the laundromat, the billion theft, because an element of those crimes were the preparation of the legal framework, and that was not done by the criminals. It was done by members of the government, people with important positions. They are not part of the criminal prosecution. I don't know why in Moldova such type of crime is not investigated, and I hope the things change. But how do we do? What does it take us to do to prevent these from happening? Thank you. And I would definitely answer your questions, but first I would like to draw some conclusions on what has been mentioned by Mr. Ciobanu and Mr. Pasha. Well, first of all, how do we do what Valerio said? How do we act in relation to a lack of alternatives? Indeed, currently, it may seem that there are only two poles: the current government, and the other side is the union of kleptocrats and oligarchs or former oligarchs. Indeed, we are in such a situation, and this is not good at all. And this is why, no, Valerio referred to something else. Valerio said that the citizens somehow, the people, the voters, and that was from the electoral perspective. I agree this is not good, and I think that there should be extra parliamentary parties that would be supported by the citizens. And this is, after all, not our problem, but the problem that they have, that their messages are not read, are not perceived by the citizens, and they might probably think what they need to do in order to change this approach. Okay, as regards the funding of the parties, and Lilian said, and I'm saying that as well, that is an extremely important element, because the oligarchic regime, or as Mr. Ciobanu has mentioned it, 2009, 2015 was a competitive oligarchy, and it was a mafiotic captured state. And this is the illegal funding, untransparent financing of parties, and we have this in the plan, and we promise that, and the Central Election Committee has to act on that, and it has to have instruments to stop this, which would turn into an illegal funding of electoral campaigns, and then oligarchs come to the power, and they try to repay their debts in inverted commas from public funds, and the speed of the reforms is really important. At the same time, and the systemic reforms, I always say that you cannot, not pay attention or avoid paying attention to high-profile corruption, and that takes changes in the institutions, and there are certain things which have happened, and the prosecution service has a different position, which is less courageous maybe, and that the National Anti-Corruption Center, the leaders have been changed, so there are certain preconditions for existing this short-term fight for high-profile corruption. We can't make systemic reform without fighting big high-profile corruption, without doing well. Okay, this is what I wanted to get to. What is a systemic reform? That's building institutions which would be functional and would not admit the establishment in the future of a kleptocratic regime, so that we have such solid institutions such as prosecution service that would stop any politician which would want to become a plahotniuk. That would be a systemic reform, and we want to make it via pre-vetting, to have a CSM in the beginning, and then clean the body of prosecutors and judges and remove those people that have issued abusive decisions, which have assets or property, which own property which exceeds several times their level of revenues. And that would allow to not establish kleptocracy and so on. At the same time, citizens can't wait for 4 years. I mean, you can't deal with systemic reforms only, and to make sure that the country is free from oligarchic or kleptocratic regime, and they start fighting for and building. They start building those institutions that they want to make. So I wanted to say that you can't make one without dealing with the other one. I mean, you cannot focus only combating short-term corruption and forget about the systemic reform, because there is the risk that after 4 months there will be somebody else, and the recapturing of the state institutions might happen again, just as was the case with the just as the case was. And I think that things need to be done in parallel. I also wish that things happen quicker, but you can't build institutions in half a year. This is not possible in practice. This is why we'll continue doing both. Therefore, by 2024, 2025, And I wish we have by 2024 institutions that are strong, functional, which are specific to a true rule of law state, so that we could avoid situations that somebody somehow gets to power and then captures the state institutions. You are an optimist. Do you believe that these phenomena can be reversible? I don't know if there is a place in the world where such reforms, or the reforms would be done in such a way that they would not allow to find a vulnerabilities, and if you want to corrupt a system, even if it's full of honest people, you just make a reform, you change the institution, and well, if you have democracy behind your shoulders, a real democracy, such things have been tried, but this has not been successful. I would not give you examples, but in the neighboring country, there were attempts to recapture institutions which were functional. Yes, they had been weakened. That this is only about those characters which wanted to get what they want. Unlike Moldova, here in Moldova, they wanted to steal, those wanted to get rid of criminal files that started against them. But the justice of Romania had been saved not by the politics, by the people, the civil society, which came out into the street and resisted. I wish that people in Moldova could come out in the streets and protect this. Well, it's true that this anti-corruption division had been weakened, but it has not been destroyed. Of course, in 4 years, you can't build institutions like those in Germany or in the United States, but at least you can build institutions which would be similar to the institutions which exist in Romania. Thank you very much, Minister. We would continue with the next speaker. Yeah, if you need to leave, I would like to thank you for your participation, and I'd like to invite Mr. Ilie Kirtoacă, come join us here, and I'd like to offer the floor to Vasile Grădinaru, whom we have online. Mr. Grădinaru is a PAS MP and head of the legal division for head of the division for legal matters, immunity, and appointments. Good afternoon. Can you hear me? I can't hear anything. Can you hear us now? Yeah. Okay. Well, I don't hear you now again. No, I can't hear. Mr. Grădinaru, you don't have to hear us. We have to hear you. Could you please speak so that we can make sure that we can hear you? Thank you. I think that our colleagues, participants in the studio spoke about the kleptocracy, how it appears, how it is manifested, and so on. I would like to speak more of what we could say, what we still need to do, what measures we need to undertake as MPs, as Parliament, to prevent and control this phenomenon. Many of them, the majority of them, have been actually included in the report that has been proposed and discussed before, but I would like to develop a little bit on that. First of all, the very first thing that I wanted to refer to was the reason why this has these forms of societal administration occur. There are certain characters that became political, have obtained financial resources, whether from within the country or from outside of the country, mostly illegal, that have been subsequently used to get control over the state institutions and then to control all the entire state. Once these resources have been used, the state institutions have been subordinated, starting with the government, parliament, until the very last institution in the state. And then these institutions, which have been controlled, through them, we have developed and applied normative acts just as these people wished, and so that they gave the wished for result for one or a person or a group of persons. And just as we spoke, we tried to intervene to destroy this system and to prevent them from happening in the future. And first of all, if we speak of the financial resources, we have managed through the institutions of the state, which are weak, and we try to strengthen them. We try to stop certain financial flows coming from within the country and from outside. And here it's about the fighting the money laundering or obscure funding or from donations. And there were very many appearances where parties had members or donors which made donations which exceeded a lot more than the revenues which they had. And this only shows that these are obscure funds, and these are not real donors, but people on whose name these donations are just registered. We tried to stop this phenomenon to and this is about not controlling the state institutions, but giving them independence. And you've probably seen at the level of the president, speaker of the parliament, and we have spoken as MPs, have mentioned repeatedly that the state institutions need to become independent and act only in conformity with the law. And we will definitely try and it would become necessary so that they work, so that they produce the necessary outcomes for the interest of the state. With the presidency and with the parliament, there was a fight, and we won actually that, and we obtained the right of the citizen to lead the state for the interest of the citizens. And then as having the executive and legal power, we try to modify the legislation so that we can appoint people so that they can take decisions strictly for the interest of the state and not as it has been organized so far. And those with whom we had reasonable doubts, or where we had this, and where it was not possible, or if a more complex reform was necessary, there had been, and we tried to make the largest reform, and so that we can give possibility to the justices and the prosecutors and judges. We tried to see how they acted so far, and how integral they are, how they acted in the interest of the state and the law, and not one single person. And therefore, this process will take a lot of time, but we are glad that this process has already started. And even if it would last long, I'm sure we'll have a good result so that we make sure that the state institutions act in their interest. And the last but not least is the making of legal amendments so that we cannot obstruct the appearance and the entry into the electoral system of persons or characters, I would say, which don't necessarily have a public interest, but rather a private interest. And here we have to speak of access to funding, and you probably know that now, together with the Central Election Committee and Promolex, we are working on a big set of changes, and where we aim at enhancing the legal capacities of the election parties. And secondly, we try to ensure transparency in the process of financing of the parties, as I was saying before, so that this process is not damaged by incorrect funding. And the third thing is that we need to speak of the right of the citizens from the diaspora, and so that they can freely exercise their voting rights, and to ensure a correct process. And here we speak of justice and obstruction to organized transportation of the citizens to the polling stations and so on, so that we do not admit the access to power of people who have problems with integrity, use illegal resources. And of course, if these people accede to these positions, they would definitely look for a personal interest, and this would be definitely different from what has been provided for by the law. And these, having said these, I think that we can truly become a rule of law state, and then within this rule of law state, we would have the fight on concepts, on electoral offers, and they would discuss doctrines, problems, and solutions, and not material interests or interests of groups, clans, and so on. This was what I wanted to say.
Thank you. You're in the parliament, busy probably. So let me ask you some questions now so that you could go to two things here. So look, in preempting this pre-vetting, you started some changes in the institution. You've changed some managers. So when I was reading the study about kleptocracy, but actually when I was looking at the changes in many institutions, so there's this question. You have criteria based on which you assess institution managers or some people who you say, well, this one doesn't pass and this one passes. How do you avoid subjectivism? I'm asking you because, I don't want to run any comparisons, but you probably had a lot of objections to the list of political cases that the former Prosecutor General Stoyanoglu has made. We did not understand why in that list you had some people like having political cases, but others did not, why half of the list was Platon's people. Maybe this was injustice against them, but there was injustice against other people as well. Look, the objections towards them were that what are the criteria? We want to see the criteria that you've screened all cases. And you said that these ones have problems and these ones do not. Now, with these people that you have assessed, heads of institutions, deputies of institutions, deputy heads of institutions, Did you have a set of criteria according to which you assessed them, or you actually had a lot of subjectivism? Okay, let me give you two examples, very clear ones, that have been discussed publicly. One was finalized and one is not yet, but the approach was the same. It's about the director of the NAC and about the Prosecutor General of Moldova. When we do the assessment, when we don't do an internal process which is invented or developed by someone from past, these are the legal norms that are in force. We didn't approve it; they were approved before us. Now the law has a clear description of what are the competences or powers of the NAC director, what are the obligations of this person, what is the action program that NAC committed to. So this is what the NAC had to do, and what are the results of their activities. Having analyzed these things, which are provided again by the law and which were not developed by us, we merely wanted to overlap, to put together what the law says, what are the responsibilities, what are the objectives of the action plan versus outcomes, to see to what extent the goals have been covered by actions and whether results have been delivered. So then it's very clear if he's gone through the assessment, or if he passed or he failed. Now, for the NAC colleagues, just one example. I looked at the amount of seizures applied on the 5 billion case before the director of the center resigned and after. After he left, if I'm not mistaken, and if it didn't change, the amount didn't change, they've applied seizures on assets exceeding 7 billion lei. This is a lot. We're talking about MLAs now, which were not done in Romania, our neighboring country, which is the most open to cooperate with us. They didn't do MLAs with them to obtain certain information and to request certain activities, and then many other things which could have been done and were not done. And then that talks to what extent the management of NAC and of the director himself have made their job, have done their job, they've reached their goals or not. The same thing is about Prosecution General or Prosecutor General, Mr. Sonoglu. The same thing, have been provided by the law, and the assessment will be done in strict compliance with the law. Moreover, the assessment will not be done in the Prosecutor General by the Parliament or by the government. It will be done by the SCP, and then they will see very clearly to what extent it is in line or not. Look, it is not about subjectivism, but rather this is an objective procedure, but which, when it comes to subjectivism, you can only blame us when there are certain information in the public sphere and about a NAC director or about prosecutor general or a prosecutor or a judge, that there are some information in the public sphere, and we cannot be indifferent to that. That is why we thank the free press in Moldova, who doesn't hesitate to highlight these issues, and we are not indifferent to that, and we try to act when it is appropriate. But I was saying, assessment is not subjective; it is objective based on the law, existing law. Thank you so much, Mr. Grinaru. Probably I wasn't very clear. I didn't mean the assessment of the two individuals that you talked about. I was rather referring to seeing things globally, because we talk about kleptocracy now. Kleptocracy means involvement of a number of institutions. I don't know if Mr. Flocea actually had more integrity problems, or was he better or less efficient than Mr. Chetaru, who managed the same institution, and he's member of Court of Accounts, a very important institution of control of how public money is spent. And there, you haven't done the assessment yet. was referring to that, basically, that if we start cleansing process, I think you have to go everywhere where there was oligarchy, because there was a number of institutions involved, and unfortunately you haven't reached all of them with the assessment of their managers of these institutions, and with changing those who have reasons to be sacked. Now, another short question to you about these changes to the electoral code that you mentioned. So one of the proposals is for the political parties, the political electoral competitors, not to be obliged to submit their income declarations when they submit their documents to participate in the electoral campaign. That is a good tool, at least for the journalists to understand who are these people, who are these contestants. You know, we do some screening before people vote them, because people don't know that this guy has 30 offshore companies and 40 businesses in Russia, and he actually, when he wins elections, he will get the money from there. If they don't submit income declarations, this becomes very complicated. I hope that you'll give up on this idea. And even if CEC doesn't have tools to check this wealth that they declare, at least to leave us, journalists, to help the state and the citizens by verifying, to the extent possible, these income declarations of candidates. Tell us if you intend to give up on this idea. We are still discussing. I mean, this we don't even have a final draft to change the law on this very idea. We're still discussing. There's no final decision yet. Don't even have any conclusions about that. We already have 4 workshops done on the analysis and proposals to change electoral legislation. And yes, there, within these discussions, within these workshops, we discussed about these declarations, and it's about the declarations submitted by people who are candidates for mayors, councillors, etc. The problem that was invoked by electoral bodies was about the fact that, yes, indeed, they're not able to, in due course, in due time, between the time of submitting and the time of elections, so that they would be able to intervene in order to limit that process and exclude that contestant from the electoral campaign, so that they have a fair electoral process. Yes, this is a problem. On the other hand, I agree with you that this information should be made public, because in my opinion, this information can be used not just for those elections, but future elections as well. Moreover, I really believe that this can serve as evidence for future activity. But we have to strike a balance before giving public access and information about a candidate, in order to be able to understand that for those who want to make studies, for those who want to make analysis, for those who inform the public opinion, and on the other hand, want to see to what extent this can bring added legal value, so that we could influence this process, because the goal of this declaration was to stop, to exclude from the electoral process some people who do not fulfill conditions, or who are having some risks. That is why one of the proposals was made in this regard. There's no final decision, and we will talk about it for sure after we will summarize the findings of those 4 workshops on changing the electoral code, electoral legislation. We will draw conclusions. We will develop a draft, and we will make public discussions with all stakeholders, and of course we will take the best decisions to improve the legal framework. We were telling you that we are trying to provide more transparency on those who fund political parties and those who are the candidates, to see to what extent they have certain legal resources. And there is a certain presumption of well intent to be candidate for this position, and we will improve the law in this regard. Thank you so much, Mr. Granado. I'll give the floor to Ilan Rusu. He's the head of the NAC, and I encourage those who follow us online that you can ask questions. Those participants to today's event, the questions will be taken by the colleagues, and we will ask them here live. Mr. Rusu. Thank you so very much, and thank you for this invitation to this event. Before getting to some practical examples, let me give you some theory of how can we get rid of kleptocracy. Generally, prevention is very impactful, and we have to start with prevention. The problem with prevention is that it costs money and time that we don't have. And this is a problem when the society has been the victim of a captured state of a total control over public resources. So the most successful solution, the best ingredient, is a combination of prevention activities, first of all, aimed at the young generation, constant communication with young generation, but also very determined actions of fighting big corruption, but not only, because different criteria to see what big corruption is. There is systemic corruption with big impact. For instance, permits. When someone who is not able to drive gets a driving license, this whole process doesn't involve a lot of money, but social impact is so big. Secondary effects could be devastating. We know that there are cases, the situations when there are accidents, when pedestrians are killed, when children are killed. Well, people who are smashed on the roads. Well, that is systemic corruption. Social impact is enormous. So the interest is to fight not only with big corruption, but also with systemic corruption as well. What we can do is to focus resources, diligence, and effort to investigate efficiently the well-known and so-called legacy cases like bank fraud and state institutions which were defrauded, and dubious concessions or different schemes about fraudulent extraction of assets from these companies for certain criminal groups. In the NAC, we have some priorities. First of all, it's important for cases that we document with anti-corruption prosecutors to be finalized, and we don't finalize. We provide evidence, we structure the case, we provide a qualification, and we use operational resources that we have. The finality of this is from justice. We want that this case ends and have an impact on the society. We're talking about judges who show integrity, and we need actions which are consolidated actions on checking the integrity of these judges. We have legal tools. It's like illegal enrichment or other articles from criminal code in order to make them responsible, or actually We also talk about bribing to issue decisions which are illegal, and we plan to do just that. Another very important issue is about the way we manage public resources. And here, we need to understand that we have multiple stakeholders, and there's a lot of procurement in many sectors, but the priority is big contracts. So you talk about transactions with European funds or other funds from other development partners, so that the value offered with generosity by our partners, the value would go to infrastructure projects or other investments. So we would be very careful of how these resources are being used, and we will work together with our partners on that. Let me also talk about a very special item that so that we reach the efficiency that we keep talking about, international cooperation. It is not a big secret that a lot of resources, illegal resources, are not in Moldova. Most of them are outside. So that does affect the progress when it comes to confiscating these assets. So it is key to make information exchange as quickly as possible, but also full exchange of information with our colleagues from jurisdictions of the EU member states, as well as countries that are part of the European Economic Area. I'm talking about Switzerland, we have UK, but also countries like Cyprus, Italy, Spain, Portugal, many jurisdictions which actually hold lots of wealth, which could be product of delinquent activity. I think this was the message of the Berlin conference. We count a lot on joint efforts from the groups that exchange information and creating joint investigation teams with prosecutors from these member states, so that we can change rapidly information amongst us and also objectively investigate and comprehensively investigate cases which involve stakeholders that we know very well what they're about.
And here it's not the so-called first line. The first line is known to everyone. There is a whole army, the second wave, the third wave, that have comfortably benefited from the results of this kleptocratic state that we have all ended up in. And they would have to be held to account, including by being taken away, by taking away the illegally obtained assets. Sorry, I cannot hear the question. Well, the question you are asking is very good. 2 months after I started working in the NACC, I have realized that there are integral professionals, but also other types of people. The identification process is still underway. I have organized it by myself, and here I'd like to make reference to the available resources. Yes, there are available resources that we could, for us to excel in that as well. But I need to admit that this is also a learning by doing exercise. Certain behaviors develop with the time, especially when there are specific cases put in place. After 2 months, after I have offered a credit of confidence to all the staff of the NACC, this has come out, and we have acted accordingly. I am sure that the internal division and internal security division and other divisions will help deal with that. And I'd like to refer to also my previous speakers. There are several fronts, and there's the front of systemically developing the institutions, but also the current and this is really important, and each stage is subject to verification, and the team is sufficiently integral. I mean, this specific case and this team, and if there are doubts, we take decisions, we change the team, and we come back to the information that we have, and the openness. I need to highlight the openness of the colleagues, and the asset recovery office and the analytical division and colleagues from the general division for control of corruption and criminal prosecution have already started generating some results. I mean, I would not give you more details because right now I am also constrained by the law that would affect the efficiency of criminal prosecution. Well, I have recently seen how promptly all the assets of Russian oligarchs have been put under arrest, and I'm sure not that the prosecution of the Russian Federation have been acting on that, but these assets have been identified, they have been put under arrest, the yachts and so on. The question is whether we could also fit into this mechanism that would be fast and easier. Oh, thank you for this question. We need to make a difference between these two processes. In our case, this is about the prosecution of assets which we suspect are coming from illegal activities. What has happened with the assets of the Russian nationals, this is more a response to this unprovoked war, and it has a different connotation. However, we definitely see opportunity to communicate with our colleagues and to ask them for their promptness, and this is done not only at the level of the EU states, but also European Parliament level. And also we need to build these links that they would also exist later on. It shouldn't be a one-time exercise. And it's important that these actions that were quite rapid from the exchanges with the colleagues to identify and freeze the assets which are on the name or belong to prominent people of the Russian Federation. This proves that this capacity exists and it can be used. And following this example, although the legal start is different, and here that's about the it is important to convince thereof our colleagues, highlighting the fact that this is a two-way street. It's not only our interest, it would also be the interest of our colleagues, but also the prosecutors from member states, because we have a liberalized visa regime, and there is already a quite intense cooperation because Moldova exports over 65% of the exports to the EU, and that proves that our commercial links are very strong.
de către cetățeni sau de-a noștri sau ai care dețin cetățenia unui stat membru UE,
and
care s-ar putea
the citizens of the EU member states, which could be on our territory. And
aici noi putem să oferim în perspectivă, accentuând că pe noi ne interesează să încheiem dosarele istorice.
and we would like to finalize with our historic files, and now we want to act on the files which are still not resolved. Well, we need to start doing our homework, because if we have a good indictment on big corruption cases in Moldova, probably the openness to the derogatory commissions and to our requests, the openness would be higher. And if I'm not
inclusiv în
mistaken, Switzerland had been quite open to provide us support in arresting assets, but we didn't want this
de până
for some reason. Maybe some a year ago that was the case. I hope this would be so. Former Deputy Director of NACC, Cristina Țerne, I would like to offer you the floor. Please, if you could take not more than 10 minutes so that we manage time-wise.
Vreau să mulțumesc autorilor studiului pentru o lucrare
I would like to thank the authors for this very interesting work, very necessary in the Republic of Moldova's context. And it has been mentioned several times about captured states, selective justice, but an analysis and the dissection of the phenomenon by applying examples and models that are specific to this society. This is very important. And not just, speak or use terms that everybody uses, but understands what that is. I am very interested, and that's a professional interest. I'm very interested in analyzing the phenomenon of corruption at different levels where that appears. And there are a number of specialized works, which of course speak about that. And I would like to refer to this mimicry in its in nature, that is the capacity of a weak plant so it's mimicry, and so it's mimicry in the nature. It's the weaker taking the form of the stronger, and in the politics it is the same. The predators, put on these attire of innocent and nice persons, and of course the mimicry's ultimate purpose is corruption. So mimicry generates hybrid systems, and these hybrid systems we can discuss a lot, and we can discuss a lot about kleptocracy and other things, but in the references that I have consulted, the hybrid systems say that this would be these hybrid systems. So that would be an oligarchic regime. So why would the autocracy, competitive autocracy, or captured state? So competitive autocracy combines the elements of democracy of an autocracy, and this say that this is more dangerous of this because the elements that it has, there is the appearance of democratic processes, there is the law, there is multi-parties. So at first sight, you might not even say that this is an autocracy. It's a hidden autocracy. according to the appearance of competitive elements, which are specific to democracies. However, this is really dangerous because while in an autocracy, the tyrant has everything in his hands, and it might be possible that after what we've seen in a number of after what we have seen in Kazakhstan, Belarus, or other areas where there had been concentrations in some autocrats, the power was concentrated in their hands, and then this has been concentrated, the resources were concentrated in their own hands, and they're trying to fight corruption at the very low level. The competitive autocratic regime requires loyalty, and that is access to resources from top down. And that is the kleptocratic regime, what this is about. Because there is an attempt to provide these corrupt bonuses, and of course the kleptocrat or the main tyrant has access to the most resources, but it is necessary that all these levels until the regular civil servants, they have access to the benefits of corruption, and that guarantees poverty, that guarantees endemic poverty, that and it is very difficult to get rid of that. And there are three essential elements which perpetuate these competitive autocracies. This is control of media, access to administrative resources, and justice. And I think if we look at our case, we are just the classical by-the-book case. This survey also clearly shows the very big desire to control justice, to capture it, and to recapture it. And this is clear. And if we look at corruption, corruption is defined as abuse of power for personal, private purpose. And when the country builds its anti-corruption strategies, it focuses on forms of abuse, in how many ways you can commit abuses of power, but there's very little said about how you obtain the power, or the way you obtain the power is a very important precondition of corruption at a higher level, such as the captured state or competitive autocracy. And if corruption, or since corruption is if you make a difference between the phenomenon of corruption and the broader sense and a captured state, you could say that corruption actually tries to avoid the law for the interest of the ones who want to obtain benefits, while the captured state is the state which imposes the law so that they can steal without being punished. So what the NACC does broadly, of course, they fight the phenomenon of corruption. The possibilities of the law enforcement party have fewer possibilities to fight this, because they actually, wrap it up in lawfulness. This is why I was happy to find out that he believes prevention is very important, while the anti-corruption expertise instrument gives a very good possibility to forecast when something becomes a law, and the law becomes the resource of someone who want to get enriched. We know the liberalization of capital, the airport, the banking So all of that have a secured lawfulness space, and then it is very difficult for prosecutors to fight something which is a law. It's not illegal, but this perspective or this and the understanding of the phenomenon as being illegal before it becomes a law, it offers one of the instruments of prevention, which is the anti-corruption expertise. And I wanted to I also wanted to refer a little bit to the FIU and to make a case study, and we need to pay attention to how we get power. So electoral processes are important, and this is why we have spoke of the amendments to the elections code, and apparently the discussion that has happened is the exclusion of the declaration of the to the elections, and this is more useful to the media, and that was the debate of one of the debates organized by the Central Election Committee and Promolex. What is media? The media is the way how people, well, when you say the media in the electoral process, this is the understanding of the people and their decision to take, or their capacity to take decisions on who will lead them. So you can't say that media has a separate or secondary role in the electoral processes. Actually, they have a main role. So this has a main role. And we spoke of Bahamas. We wouldn't have found out about Bahamas if there was not the investigative media. And now, since we pay a lot of attention to this, and they're trying to check mechanisms for illegal funding, I'd like to say that exclusion of the declarations of the candidates would make it more difficult, because parties can, or as soon as they are suspected of illegal funding or obscure funding, they might make reference to certain people on their list and say that, well, actually, they got these revenues from people who were never in the public space. They never submitted their statements, and nobody, checked their property. And these declarations of property are very important also for the funding of the political parties. And even if in the elections, the candidate is not promoted in an elective position, but then they do it in 4 years and they get there for the National Integrity Center. This is a good opportunity to see whether they can attribute property or wealth before the previous election campaign and they have declared their wealth. So these are apparently insignificant issues as they are treated by the media. No, they actually have consequences for eventual files, criminal files. And well, I have to stop you. We will speak about this on a different occasion. We would want to offer the same time for everyone. Mr. Kirtoaka, Center for Legal Resources, please. Dear colleagues, good afternoon. Thank you very much. And it is necessary to identify the critical mass of the people, so that they are not, we need to understand that this cannot move on until we have the stage which has been mentioned. So the captured state. I will continue very briefly to what the previous speaker said. Indeed, a practical example. Let us look at two declarations of 2009, Mr. Plahotniuk and Mr. Platon, which were then liable to submit these declarations or statements. And you will see there people who are poor, very poor, and
Deci,
yeah, I have saved them, so I do have them. You will see there that people,
corespunde
those people have very difficult living, and then we can have a clear message. We can see that that person has not been integral. And coming back to what I wanted to say
de asemenea
in my
studii.
speech, such studies are important, such surveys are important. And even if it is a cliche, it is important to learn from what history offers us. So what we have learned in the study, it was not theory only. This is something that we live through these things, and they happen with a lot of promptness. And it is important for us to move to the other part. We at the Center for Legal Resources, we looked at how corruption is punished, and we looked at over 400 statements, relatively recent, 2017, 2020, and this is something that the media has been saying, that the cases of corruption are hard to investigate. They are very slow to be looked at in the court, to be tried, and those who are punished are not necessarily those who have stolen from the banks, though they are the people who have provided bribe, and so the people who are conductors in the train, they are not, or those who steal from banks, and the resources of the state to investigate that, they go there. They don't go for high-profile cases, and for which there is a status of limitations. The solutions that I have heard, and they are in the survey, they are obviously viable if they are treated systemically and applied systemically by integral people and good faith people. I will take only one example, international sanctions. As there's no time, I'll take only one. Putting people on the list and make it in such a way that the people who are now in London or in Zurich or other European capitals, so the people are there because there is a law or rule of law system, there is some safety for them.
Pentru a fi viabile, pentru a
be
fi
viable, to be applicable, they need quite a lot of quite a big of a body of evidence, which I'm afraid that in case of historical cases, laundromat and the banks and other high-profile cases, I don't know if it is enough. The fact that we just now will start collecting this evidence, that will mean that the results will become too late. Another solution, and here it was not in the study basically, but I think Mr. Granada talked about it, it's about legislation. This is a problem too, because in my job description, I need to check the weekly agenda of the parliament with draft laws, etc. I'm not able to read everything. And I don't know how MPs vote so many, more than 20, 30 draft laws at a single session, Thursday or Friday. It means that unfortunately our laws are changed way too often, and that increases the risk that what things will happen, laws will legalize a theft. So, of course, this is valid for everything. And let me give you one more example, and I'll complete here. Extended confiscation, a very, very good, important mechanism which could yield results. We received proposals as organizations to intervene with comments and proposals from the institutions. And we've analyzed 3 different drafts. It means that there are people who want to improve, but they are not somehow put into they don't talk to each other, because the same resources that the state has and which are limited, they are not used to the fullest possible extent. That's why we need to channel and to have a center which at the same time should be responsible for the reform, should be either blamed or should be given credit for being able to pull the reform through. And that is one of the mechanisms through which we can succeed. And the last but not the least, we need to focus on what is going on now. And of course, I was walking near beautiful historical buildings and a new pavement. Here and now, I think we have corruption schemes in our city. Or they continue, or the money that left in our bag are cleansed here, are laundered here. I think fraud is happening, probably, which we'll find out later. No, I don't want to those who lead the country now are very, very responsible, and we, as civil society, we can help them with everything needed. It is important, however, for the steps to fight with corruption to be small but sure steps, so that these reforms are irreversible. I know it's hard, but we need to try and do it. Thank you. Yeah, they are irreversible. Thank you so much, Ilya. All right, so I just wanted to say one more thing as a journalist, because for us, it is very important to understand the processes which are happening. And for that, from the very outset, like in the restaurant, they give you the menu and it writes what you need, what you can order. I want to see a concept of this strategy of justice reform, because if we compare the statements and the menu from July, then it is not valid anymore. Things have changed and we don't understand. There is a document, a concept which is rigid, or things are changing, or if they're changing, then why they're changing, because that we need to understand as a society. Even though you give confidence and there is goodwill, this goodwill or this credit of goodwill cannot just be given for granted. And the last speaker of today, Victor Munteanu, head of Justice Department. Mr. Munteanu. Thank you, Mariana. Can you hear me well?
Sau nu? Da, ce vreau scrie că vă auzim. Ok. Atunci pot să vorbesc. Mulțumesc, Mariana.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'll make an effort not to tire you beyond the limits of the agenda. First of all, let me thank Victor Ciobanu, but also colleagues from Watchdog and IPRE, Iulian Groza and Valeriu Pasha for this kleptocracy description in Moldova. You helped me a lot because we've eliminated a range of observations and comments from my intervention because they were already tackled and I should not repeat those. I will dwell on some aspects that I think are important and relevant. It's about the social culture or subculture created by kleptocracy in Moldova. It is about an opinion that if it doesn't dominate, but it persists among young people. And you can do traffic of influence. So getting rich without a just cause is not a vice, but a talent, a success. And it's not about a decent living, but immense wealth. For young people, there are many examples. For instance, young politicians who 10 or 15 years ago would make the first steps in their fight to carry the bag of political leader or to have access to his shoes. For many young people from Moldova, couple of months of arrest is not just a scarecrow anymore, because that is the biggest punishment given so far. And the more you're able to steal, the easier it is to get away with just simply fleeing the country. What do people think in Moldova? Either I leave somewhere, or I actually stay here and carry the bag of the politician. The option of a fair, correct career is only possible theoretically for the money that he gets at the end of the month as a public servant. Doesn't allow him to pay public transportation, utilities, and food now, not tomorrow. That must be paid at the end of every month. So subculture, that means that meritocracy and competition have nothing to do with accessing a chair of MP. This is very much there. What do we do with this subculture? This is a big sign, signature, question sign, because kleptocracy proved that we can have, people can have impossible jumps in a society when people who are illiterate could access, who could become MPs through all kinds of things by accessing the bag of an MP. Leaders of criminal groups, mafia groups, have made considerable efforts to brainwash and to promote fakes and to distort reality through a media attack. We should understand that all of the efforts of reinstate justice within the rule of law limits and not to the service of criminals will be unsuccessful if the public opinion will be favored, created in a favor and towards the leaders of criminals through the TVs stations that they have, social networks, and the trolls. If we look carefully, the same sources which would support kleptocratic politician leaders, politicians, they are promoting false statements about war in Ukraine. Kleptocracy is not a simple theft. Maybe initial stage it is the same. It is as such, but at a certain point in time, they want power and acknowledgement. They want applauses. They want public acclamation. They want to. It's a whole social engineering. Well, where black becomes white and white becomes black. Where any person who steals $1 million, he needs more than money, vanity, and then they get to authoritarian regime, autocracy, and tyranny. Russia is just a very appropriate example in this regard. People love their tyrant who tens of years ago started as a small mouse at the FSB, who was able to use the weaknesses of a system. I think it's not possible to kill kleptocracy without dismantling the social engineering, because this is the support of a huge social layer, which when necessary becomes the voters. Of course, the abuse of free expression is a phenomenon that we don't know what to do with, because the balance of rights is not known to us in Moldova. Freedom of expression, at the same time, is not absolute. When they promote falsehoods, manipulation, propaganda becomes a rule. Fighting big corruption is not possible without a serious attitude and international mechanisms of fighting it. It was not possible, it won't be possible without involving the support of European banks who facilitated money laundering, and big international businesses, real estate businesses, of actually tolerating money laundered in offshore beyond justice, where we look now. And of course, we will not be able to do it if we don't stop advertisement and the impunity of the leaders of technocratic networks and pseudo services that they provide to society, and the fact that without them, the sky will fall on Moldova and end of world will come. I said it and I'll finalize it that the current government, even though clearly determined to dismantle the kleptocracy, I don't think it has a well-structured plan beyond the extraordinary vetting of judges and prosecutors. This is a decisive step, important step, but it doesn't have the potential of a panacea. I will support here Valeru Pasha, who actually stated that we need radical intervention, invasive ones and multidimensional ones. You know, bureaucracy is necessary and it exists everywhere. But if bureaucracy, including the one criminal procedural, will replace what we call fighting big corruption, we don't have any chance. The society is not okay with just vetting. But let's be honest, if you ask a simple person who doesn't have too much information, what does he know about how the current government fights big corruption, they will say that they do something on justice, or the best case, they evaluate the judges. So what? I ask myself, so what? At least one scheme, you know, if it were stopped, for instance, the one from real estate, people would appreciate that. It's ridiculous to talk about fighting corruption when when you have buildings everywhere in Chișinău. This is a provocation from those who are corrupt, because they prove that they can do whatever they want. This is a fight of a symbol of corruption that the government is losing now. Just one single building from București Street, you know very well about which I talk. If it were to be demolished, they would contribute to strengthening the public opinion about how serious corruption fight is. But I think time has expired and we need visible, tangible results. And you also talk about efficient communication. All of this are lacking from the war chest of fight with kleptocracy, which we have now and we know now. My time is expired. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Măceanu. So I'll give you some seconds to concentrate some ideas. I'll read a recommendation that comes from Denis Chenusha, who followed our event but couldn't connect to give his recommendations. For you, Mr. Ciobanu, Dionisia is focusing on the fact that the oligarchy and kleptocracy notions, they are different and they need to be treated differently. And he also, probably he listened, right? Yeah. He makes a difference between the two notions. And he was saying that generally the study is very useful and he believes that it will be good to be examined carefully by the authorities. Another observation that comes from him is, I think he actually talks about the sanctions already. You referred to this, Mr. Russo. They've applied sanctions on corruption cases against Yanukovych regime. All individual sections have been eliminated as a result of the court decisions. And because this was cause and effect between the wealth as well as committing criminal actions in Ukraine. So you cannot put all the blame on general community. If there is no evidence in the country, then you can easily dismantle sanctions without actually selling them, but the money recovered from where they were stolen. Okay, conclusions. Ms. Sterner, I'll start with you, 30 seconds. So I think that justice reform is not a panacea of fighting big corruption. Even in this evaluation of judges, I agree that it is necessary, but the method matters. And I started talking about mimicking. Mimicking, it generates not only the appearance of democratic institutions. Mimicry, this is a method through which you accumulate political capital by associating with different institutions. We create a DNA, right? And the corruption prosecution, at least we were promised 5 times that it will be transformed into a DNA. I don't know how from a DNA you create another DNA. And then in the world, DNA is a model of success for international community, but I haven't heard too many countries who were able to implement it with the same success as in Romania. That's why I think that the phenomenon of mimicry is to blame, and the fact that politicians are trying to associate themselves with phenomenal success when they don't intend to implement them. IPRE that Mr. Russo talked about, they were based on local realities which exist. And from the problems that exist, I'm very happy that they are working. There's, of course, room for better. There's many technical solutions that could improve the activity of this institution. So this is what I wanted to say, and thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you very much, Ms. Cerna. Okay, you, sir. I think that the discussions have been interesting, necessary, and the intervention, a bit academic, is necessary in Moldova, where these think tanks, institutions lack, which can generate solutions. 2 things here. We have a strategy approved at the beginning of the year, very ambitious one, on a new strategy of justice, preventing corruption and the reform of justice. It is a document which includes a lot of ambitious activities. At least if half of them would be realized, then we could exit this stage, which is blocking us. And in the EU legislation on protection of private data, there's a principle, privacy by design. So it is built in such a way, this system, that corruption cannot go through. The classical example is electronic solutions that would remove these permits that make you dependent on that person from the window. And these solutions can be explored in the area of anti-corruption. It's called anti-corruption by design, or integrity by design, so that we could have a construction that could minimize this factor where corruption just flourishes. I will get back to what I started my statements with. So I'm perfectly aware that kleptocracy is somehow narrow in the context of a oligarchy and captured state and mafia state that will be researched still. But the advantage of this term is that it is operational, being very narrow. Kleptocrat is a thief, and the thief must be found and punished. And that's the advantage of selecting this phenomena, which was researched in this study, model study.
Thank you also for having invited me at this event. To draw a conclusion, I'd like to refer to our priorities. Let us not forget about prevention, although the results would come in a longer term perspective, and we will continue our fight against corruption at all levels. We would prioritize sectors such as public procurement, the judiciary sector, and we will make sure that the local public authorities which manage public resources respect the law. And in this case, they would be investigated through the light of criminal law. Mr. Munteanu, just really brief. The time's up, and it is necessary to see tangible results, efficient results. Fight with the kleptocracy is an informational war that the government is losing so far. Otherwise, the boomerang law would not be is not annulled. Mr. Pasha. Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you to everyone for these discussions. As it had been expected, besides the components which were discussed in this survey, we came up to address very many aspects, both the component of how we build a system which through its functioning prevents corruption, starting with the issue of salaries in the public sector, which unfortunately on the crisis which had overlapped again is not in the focus, because we need people in the key institutions of the state. Yes, we cannot afford decent salaries for all the budget employees, and people who would be capable to draft a decision of the government and then check whether it has been implemented and if the law is applied, and if we truly implement the bilateral agenda, which brings us closer to the European Union and many other priorities. So today, in the public sector, we have two categories of employees, ministries, agencies, about which Mr. Munteanu spoke quite well, that ask for a payment for trafficking of influence, and so they are perceived as thieves, and they have no interest to move things forward, just for the sake of ticking the box for the boss, because they also need this, or we are people losers who are perceived like that by their by those who are similar to them, because this is how the Moldovan society perceives the most of the public sector employees, and very few enthusiasts who are young, who are there for a year, tick the box in the CV and continue their studies or apply somewhere where they need this experience, or political criteria people, that they are very few. And we need to create material conditions so that people are not ashamed for working at for the state, in the ministry and agency, so that people or relatives or other people don't consider them to be losers because they have accepted to work for this. For working for a system which cannot protect from corruption, and with systemic issues such as firing people, look for others who are not experienced, but give them time to learn with willingness and integrity. And this is why I think that it is necessary to communicate honestly with the society. Tell them that you cannot combine. So you cannot, move forward the files and on Plahotniuk, on laundromat, on other cases and other cases that are political, but and we investigate them now, but then in several years we end up with a system which can process them. This is why we need to process this at the limit of the rule of law, and the buildings which they build, the building itself in București and in the center of the city. And this is the part only that we know, and this is the money stolen and the barriers that that Plahotniuc has installed after, on the way to his house, they are still there and probably waiting for him to come back. And Dodon is just, in Chișinău and moving free from one place to another. And the Supreme Court of Justice had to force the prosecutor's office to start a case on obvious things, and they need to attach certain letters and submit the case to the court. And maybe there are some reasons the prosecutors have, and everyone have a reason why they don't act, and that brings years on years. And if you look at the people that all of them have these reasons, probably you shouldn't believe them. But there are many problems, and it's good that you have these discussions, and we should put this positive pressure on the government as well, and they have to know that they are supported as long as they have this honest willingness to change things. Thank you, Valerio, and thank you to everyone who have participated at this event, to the organizers and to the author of the study, Mr. Ciobanu. I think that the most important thing is we inspire and we stir enthusiasm among people who could do it. And I wish that there are no blind spots in the fight against corruption, especially that in these blind spots, there are not really schemes, but people rather. And no matter what would happen and how much the media would write about that, there is certain, there are certain issues in the law enforcement bodies, and I know Andronache is there, and I think that even if a murder would be committed in the middle of the street, he would say that it was not him, somebody who really is like that person. And I wish that the list, the list is long, and I wish that there are no half measures in investigating crimes, and that everybody engaged is investigated, because this selectiveness could bring satisfaction for the short term, but you then realize that justice was not done, it was only mimed. And everyone who watched us, please watch Cutia Neagră on Sunday with more details and specific cases which prove how we start the fight against kleptocracy in Moldova, and when and if we can have results that everybody would feel. Everybody have a great day.